Hey, this is Tom, and things are bad. And they're gonna get worse. In fact, I'm selling every single stock I have, going 100% cash because I'm pulling your chain. Not, definitely not, because of the latest inflation report that sent everybody into the basement with Grandpa. Look, the inflation report was underwhelming. I get it. And I could have rushed out a video yesterday, super quick, to get all the views and all the clout, but I needed to take about 24 hours to kind of understand how the market perceives this report to give you the best analysis as far as how this impacts my ability and your ability to make money in this market. We're here on this channel to make money. Nothing else matters. Not the haters, not the trolls, not the clicks, and not the views. So let's talk about what happened yesterday and how it impacts our ability to make money in this market. So the inflation report came out yesterday. It was 3.1, which is way better than 3.3, but much worse than the anticipated 2.9 or 3%. So it was not good. It was underwhelming. And obviously, you had the market go into a little bit of a pullback. We'll talk about that in a second. So if you dive deep into the inflation report, and we're not going to go item by item because this is one, boring, and two, not very productive. You have to look at the big picture here. Food and shelter prices were the main culprit of what happened. Now, that was not expected. Usually, shelter prices in the wintertime are not very high. People don't move in the winter. They move in the summer months. So there's a cyclicality to shelter. Usually, it's going up in July, August. This is the peak of the moves. So to see shelter go up in the middle of the winter, it's kind of unexpected and it's kind of surprising. And I think it spiked a lot of the fear. Now, you had a negative reaction in the stock market and the report was not good. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we had the best report ever and people just misunderstand it. No, the report wasn't good. And I think the main thing why we saw the market react so negatively to what happened is because it changes the narrative of when we're going to see rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. I think a rate cut in May, that was the kind of the consensus, 99% according to FedWatch. May cut was 99%. Now it's down to 39%. So it's completely changed the narrative. And based on these recent developments, basically what will happen is that mortgage rates will stay higher longer, which means housing prices will be elevated, less transactions. It will mean also that cost of borrowing will remain higher longer, which means less businesses will have less money to operate, which will also mean that DCF valuations of growth companies will remain lower because of higher weighted average cost of capital. And when you put all these ingredients into one bowl of soup, what you got yesterday was exactly that, a soup of negativity. Now, I want to calm things down here a little bit. Look, corrections are part of the game. The S&P 500 went through 5,000. It's been on a bullish ride for a long time. Corrections are going to happen. In fact, statistically speaking, in the best of years, you have at least 3 times where the S&P 500 goes down by 5% each time in a year, in a good year. So corrections are always part of your landscape. You're never going to have a year when everything just goes up linearly. It never happens. In fact, what happened yesterday was not even a correction. It was a little gust of wind. There's no need to get overexcited. I don't think there's any underlying issues in this inflation report that warrant some sort of a negative reaction or some sort of a panic. I don't think inflation is spiking back up, and I don't think any of the macroeconomic data shows that we're heading into weakness. When you look at macroeconomic data, which is always the driver of the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, what you're seeing right now is very low unemployment, very high growth rates on the GDP, and a very stable market. But as you saw in the latest report, cost of wages, which is services, is way too high, which means people are getting paid too much money for the Fed. I know everybody wants to make more money, I get it. But for the Federal Reserve to declare victory, for inflation to come down, cost of wages must come down, unfortunately. But it's a very delicate balancing act because on the one hand, you don't want to bring it down too much because you don't want to crash the economy. On the other hand, if you leave it elevated, then inflation won't come down to 2%. So the Fed has a tough job going forward. From 3% to 2%, that's the hardest part of the journey. Now, they will get there, but I don't think the journey is going to be linear. And I don't think we're going to see rate cuts in this climate until Q4 of this year. I think until September, there's nothing to talk about rate cuts. You see, the reason is because rate cuts are usually a necessity. Usually rate cuts, which is a more accommodative monetary policy, they come when the Federal Reserve feels the pressure. when the economy is suffocating, when they need that money like oxygen. But right now, what they're seeing is that the inflation is still quite high at 3%, much higher than when they want it to be, which is 2%. But the overall market, the overall macro is very, very strong. It's robust. Wages are high. Unemployment is very low, and GDP growth, the economic growth of the US, is very high, much higher than expected. So with these numbers, there's no pressure for the Fed to come down on rates before they're convinced that there's not going to be a replay of what happened before the most famous guy of the Fed, I'm talking about Volcker, came in and had to do what he had to do. Because if you remember, before Volcker, what happened is that inflation came down, they all relaxed, they brought down interest rates, and then inflation spiked up back to out of the stratosphere. And then Volcker had to come in and crash the economy. So Powell, even though he understands there's a low probability of that happening, that's his biggest fear. So until he's certain that that's not going to happen, he's going to remain at elevated interest rates just to make sure. And as long as there's no necessity from the market to pull it down, as long as the market is doing fine, he's going to be very, very cautious. There's no urgency. Now, the good news are there's no pressure on the market because the market is being strong. As long as the GDP numbers are good, as long as the unemployment numbers are low, at the end of the day, that's going to trickle down from the macro into the stock market. It will mean that the numbers on the stock market, on the earnings, on the margins, they'll be good. And that means that there's not going to be any craziness that we'll have to deal with as investors. Look, 2022 was a horrible year. We all remember how bad it was. And we all remember how everybody, myself included, said that 2023 is going to be even worse. And yet, the market has completely flipped. There's no way for us to completely predict where the market is going to head. Now, I had a foolish prediction about 2023, for sure. But at the end of the day, my portfolio from the beginning of January until now is up 112%. 8 out of the 9 stocks I talked about and I said I like during that time frame did an average of 80%, including SMCI, including ANET, including CrowdStrike. The reason is because macroeconomic data shouldn't drive your investment decisions. Your investment decisions are based on stock analysis, which is essentially business valuation. It's not about how much it's going to go up or how much the stock price has moved over the past 12 months. It's about evaluating a business you want to be an owner of. And if you want to be an owner of that business, the ownership has nothing to do with the macroeconomic data or the state of the market. You buy when it's low, you buy when it's high. You buy a little bit more when it's cheaper, you buy a little bit less when it's more expensive. This is something we've been talking about for the past 3 years, and people have been blaming me for being a broken record because I keep saying the same thing. But it's not going to change because this system works. At the end of the day, as of January 2023 until now, my portfolio went up 112% despite me getting the macro entirely wrong. At the end of the day, it's not rocket science. If you buy good companies, you keep buying over the long haul, you'll be fine. Now, if you want to learn more about how to become a better long-term investor, I invite you to join our free Discord, discord.gg/Tom Nash. We would love to see you there. Talk to us about your stocks, about your dilemmas. It's kind of a support group for all our community members. We would love to see you there. Obviously, you want to take the next step, consider joining our Patreon, patreon.com/Tom Nash. And if you want to analyze stocks for yourself better, consider using Stock MVP. You get a 1-week free trial on Stock MVP, stock-mvp.com. It's a tool we built for you guys. Would love for you to try it out. Thank you so much. Don't panic. Keep your eye on the ball. Go Palantir. I'll see you in the next one.